A very stark contrast in conditions across the Southeast for a variety of reasons. Jeff, Chris, and I will talk about that dichotomy in the October 25th edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Drought in the Southeast, flooding in the Southeast. It's amazing how different things can be from one side to the other. We have been addressing the flooding the last few weeks, so in this Water Resources Outlook, drought will be our focus. It is amazing to see a tale of two opposite stories. We actually considered doing two different water resource outlooks for this month because of the huge contrast of those that have rain and those that do not. Let's start with the wet and a 30-day departure from normal graphic. Even before Hurricane Matthew strafed the coast and brought very heavy rain through the Carolinas, much of central and eastern North Carolina and Virginia were already wet. The Little River at Manchester already had record flooding from localized rainfall at the end of September. Many areas across the state, including Charlotte, had received heavy rainfall in the weeks preceding the storm. As Hurricane Matthew approached the U.S. coast, this was the area we were most concerned about because of the already wet conditions in the state. The result was record flooding at 6 points that the Southeast RFC forecast for, and numerous major floods across the eastern Carolinas. Most of that area did not need this rain. Much of the rest of the Southeast could have used it. The below normal area is shown well in the 30-day departure. However, the year-to-date departure from normal shows just how dry the core of the Southeast is. In just a moment, Jeff will talk about some of the impacts of that rainfall deficit has had on the water resources in the area. As you can see, the tops of the Savannah, Chattahoochee, Alabama, among other river basins, have a significant rainfall deficit since the beginning of the year. The only saving grace for much of that area is the end of 2015 was very wet, providing the area with the water they used through the rest of the year.
So Todd was showing the precipitation deficits and how little rain we have seen, and of course this has led to increasing drought conditions. Here's the latest drought monitor as of October 18th, and we see the extreme drought conditions across the large part of Georgia and into Alabama. Georgia now with almost a third of the state in extreme drought conditions there in the red color, and now many communities beginning to make water restrictions across North Georgia. So the drought conditions becoming much more serious across this region. And not only becoming serious for those areas in the drought zones, but this drought area is having an effect on area rivers. This area is a headwater area for many of our rivers, and so even though the extreme drought is confined across mainly North Georgia, as you can see, these conditions will be felt downstream, far from the drought zones. We see rivers like the Chattahoochee and the Alabama, as well as the Ocmulgee River and Upper Savannah, and even the Saluda River there in northwestern South Carolina, all with the top of their watersheds in the drought-designated area, which will limit stream flows all the way down the river outside of the drought-designated areas. We look at the latest USGS 28-day stream flows and see all those red and dark red dots on the map across Georgia and Alabama, which represent stream flows below normal to well below normal, and see that these extend well downstream from those portions of the river that are within the drought area. North Carolina, a different story. After Matthew, stream flows running at record high levels in many locations after record flooding a couple of weeks ago. Florida also running higher after a rainy September. But overall, really a tale of two extremes, much above in the Carolinas and Florida and much below in Georgia and Alabama. So with that being said, what about reservoirs? How has stream flows and the dry weather affected the reservoirs? And we start in North Carolina and see that Falls Lake is running much above their target curve as they have had to hold some water during the floods, and will be slowly lowering the pool there as water recedes downstream. We see farther to the south, lakes are running closer to the targets, but Lake Norman running a couple of feet below guide curve. In South Carolina, Watery running near target, but look at the Savannah project, Hartwell, Russell, and Thurman. Both Hartwell and Thurman running several feet below guide curve, as the headwaters have seen very little rain this past late summer and fall. Moving south into Georgia, even worse, Lake Lanier 8 feet below guide curve now and falling as rain has been little to none the past several weeks. Allatoona and Carter's also many feet below target pool, and this is having an effect downstream. As you can see, several feet below at West Point and W.F. George. These two reservoirs close to their projected winter pools already. Typically, we don't see this until late November. And finally, Alabama, these lakes running just slightly below target pool. Weiss and Martin about a foot below target. Let's take a quick look at and see where we usually are for flood climatology. And we see that we are in week 43. And this is one of the quietest times of the year when it comes to river flooding, as it is typically one of the driest times of the year.
All right, let's take a look at what we can expect weather-wise across the southeast U.S. for the next week or so. We're beginning the period with an area of high pressure across the southeast. As we go through the rest of this week, we're going to see a cold front approach us, moving through the area by Friday and bringing some precipitation along with it. As we go into the midterm period into this weekend, we're going to see high pressure across the area again, and this really doesn't change throughout the midterm period. And despite a cold front moving through, it doesn't look like this front's going to have much moisture to work with. So we're still expecting high pressure across the area at the end of the midterm period. Looking at the 7-day forecast, we see precipitation mainly associated with that first front, the front that came through during the short-term period. Looking into the long term, we're expecting more of the same. We're expecting below normal precipitation amounts across the area. This isn't entirely unexpected for this time of year as we go from the warm season into the cool season. This is the type of pattern we tend to see.
So Chris has taken us through the first week of November. I'm going to quickly take us through the fall and winter because on November 18th, we plan to have an early look at the winter outlook. The current model plume of ENSO predictors leads us to believe that we will have a minimal La Niña conditions, just long enough that this will be categorized as a La Niña episode. By the time we get to late spring and early summer, it looks as if neutral conditions will prevail and therefore back to a more normal type ENSO regime for that time. As this has been consistent for a while, November's forecast is shaping up as a dry one. Chris showed the first week to be dry in the southeast, and there's not much to change that going forward. Looks like the rest of the November should be relatively dry too. Dry conditions are expected to continue into the winter across the whole southeast, possibly a consequence of La Niña. Could just be a continuation of a pretty dry fall over most of the area that just continues as the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico stays cut off from the southeast U.S. Now, the winter into spring looks like more of the same for the southeast. There's likely to be some recovery because even normal precipitation can improve conditions across the area, with little foliage and cooler temperatures helping things. Just not to the degree we would like as if we head into another summer that is dry. Also, we still have to watch the Carolinas as we come out of a wet period and head into winter. A couple of events while they remain wet and vulnerable would not be good. And so, the bottom line, in the short term, it looks like dry fall weather for the southeast. For those in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and parts of the Carolinas, this is not necessarily a good thing. For those in the central and eastern Carolinas, they need a nice break from the rainfall, so this is good news for them. As for the long term, the southeast looks to stay dry through fall and into early winter. We'll be watching stuff fairly closely to see if we have any smaller scale weather pattern change, but with a La Niña coming in, it looks to tend to be dry for the winter. Our next water resources outlook will be on November 18th, and we plan to talk a little bit more about our winter outlook and what we're expecting for the winter.